Hey everybody, in this video we're going to try to push the envelope on how we teach monetary policy with this model, the ASAD model. You see, there's some big issues in the way that we teach it currently in our classrooms. I think the biggest issue is how we teach contractionary monetary policy. What we tell our students to do with contractionary monetary policy is to shift the AD curve to the left. And when you do that, the price level comes down and real GDP declines. Two things the Fed never wants to happen. That's right, the Fed never wants the price level to go down. That's deflation. Certainly during periods of high inflation rates, the Fed may want to bring the inflation rate down, but they never want the price level to go down. During disinflation, which is bringing a high inflation rate down, getting it closer to target, which currently the target is a positive 2% inflation rate, that whole time of disinflation, the price level is actually going up. Of course it is, because the inflation rate is remaining positive the entire time. On top of that, they don't want real GDP to decline. They may want to restrict growth, restrain growth, make it so we don't grow by as much, okay? Slow growth down, but they generally don't want real GDP to decline. A little side note to this video is I also think it would be better if we embrace the terms of the financial news, which is the way they talk about monetary policy is usually a restrictive stance. That's right, their term is restrictive. The Fed is doing restrictive monetary policy far more than they use the term contractionary. Contractionary implies that we really are trying to contract things. And generally, that's not what the Fed is doing during inflationary gaps or times of booms. What they're generally trying to do is restrict or restrain growth, slow growth down. So I think a restrictive stance would be a better way to talk about monetary policy when they're trying to bring high inflation rates down. But that's a bit of a side note to this video. This video is very much about this model right here. So let me show you a new way of teaching restrictive policy or contractionary monetary policy. Now, you'll see I've got three curves. So you got to get used to it a little bit because it's a little bit different than normal when you usually show monetary policy action by simply two AD curves, but now I've got three. Here's how it looks, okay? I've got my original AD. I like AD 0. AD 1's fine too. It doesn't matter, AD 1 or AD 0. I like 0 because 0 looks like an O, and I can say, hey, that's my original curve right there. So you got your original position, which is what we do now. But then I think we should have two curves, okay? We should have an AD R star and an AD target rate. So let me talk about each one of those. AD R star, well, R star is the neutral interest rate, okay? Neutral rate of interest. It's the long run natural rate of interest. And what we associate R star or this neutral interest rate with is it's a situation where the Fed is neither being restrictive nor accommodative, which means neither contractionary or expansionary. It's an interest rate that we associate with the inflation rate, at least in the long run, not going up or down. The inflation rate remaining constant, okay? So that neutral rate, again, is a situation the Fed is neither being restrictive nor accommodative, okay? So that's our R star rate. This long run interest rate where the economy is kind of in this general equilibrium, we're at full employment and there's no inflation, there's no pressures for the inflation rate to go up or down, okay? Then, of course, we have the targeted rate, okay? The Fed targets the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is what we call their policy rate. It's kind of the interest rate in the real economy. It's a short-term interest rate. It's the interest rate where banks lend money to other banks at, okay? So federal funds rate. It's an interest rate in the real economy that they hope transmits to other interest rates in the economy. So they target this federal funds rate in hopes that that interest rate changes to that federal funds rate transmit to other interest rates throughout the entire economy. And they have a targeted rate for that federal funds rate. Now we're in May of 2024, so we have a restrictive policy stance, or at least the Fed feels that we have a restrictive policy stance. They've been fighting high rates of inflation, trying to cause that disinflation I've been talking about. And their current targeted rate for the federal funds rate is a range between 5.25 to 5.5, which the Fed thinks is restrictive. And so if they have a restrictive stance, what we should show is that AD curve shifting to the right less than if they went with R star. So to be clear, the R star, and there's a lot of arguments like how well we can predict the R star. It's really an approximation, but the Fed believes that long run natural rate of interest, or that neutral rate, is lower. That's so important, is lower than their current targeted rate. That means they're keeping interest rates above that R star rate, which means they are being restrictive. And you can see the restrictiveness in the way that we draw the model, right? We have AD shifting this far, and AD is total spending, right? It's aggregate demand, and aggregate demand is a synonym for total spending. So you've got AD shifting this far. If we went with that R star rate, again, a lower rate. But if we went, or since we're going with this targeted rate, an FFR that's higher, then we're restraining the growth in AD. And you can see the implications for the price level and the inflation rate. If we went with R star, again, that lower interest rate, then we'd see the price level go up all the way to here, right? PL R star, which is associated with this equilibrium, which is where that AD R star is hitting our SRAS curve. So we got our price level R star. So you take this difference, right? You think of this as new minus old over old. That's how you calculate the inflation rate, and you get an inflation rate. But if we go with the targeted rate, which we are, okay, so the AD targeted rate, again, that federal funds rate above the R star rate, then price level is not going to go up by as much. We're going to see us restricting the increases in the price level. So here's your new, this is what you would get with that targeted rate, and there's your original. Take that difference over your original, and you get a lower inflation rate. But we can see the price level is still going up. On top of that, you can see the restraint in growth. If we go with the R star, that lower interest rate, we would get more growth. But if we go with our targeted rate, which again is a restrictive rate because it's above that R star, you're going to get less growth. Now, of course, if you wanted to show accommodative monetary policy or expansionary monetary policy, in that situation, that'd be when the Fed would have a targeted rate that would be lower than the R star, and we would draw this AD curve off to the right of the ADR star. That's when they're trying to stimulate the economy. So that's how we can show stimulative policy, is showing that the AD, or that the Fed has a targeted rate that would cause that total spending curve to be to the right of ADR star. That's when they're being accommodative or stimulative. Now, here's another thing I really like about teaching monetary policy this way. And it brings in some nuance, okay? So right now, the Fed thinks that the current targeted rate for the federal funds rate is fairly restrictive. They think it's definitely above the R star rate by more than a percentage point. So if they cut interest rates by a quarter or a half of a interest rate, they believe they would still be restrictive. Right now, when we talk to our students, if they cut rates at all, we just shift AD to the right, called expansionary monetary policy. Now, we'd still shift AD to the right, but we just shift the ADTR, the targeted rate, to the right. And as long as the Fed believed the targeted rate was still above R star, we could show that they would still be restrictive, okay? That they're taking a restrictive stance, just a less restrictive stance, which really conforms to the real world so much better. Currently, the Fed believes if they cut interest rates by, say, a quarter of a point, that's just them becoming less restrictive, not turning into an expansionary stance, just becoming less restrictive than they are. So again, we could cut interest rates, or the targeted rate, by a quarter of a point, show AD shifting a little bit further to the right to show that we are less restrictive, but we can still tell we're restrictive. As long as our ADTR is to the left of ADR star, then we are restrictive. Again, I think that this way of showing monetary policy using an ASAD model is just so much more in alignment with the real world. And that's what we want, right? We want our models to align as much as we can with the real world. Certainly, our models will certainly never show the real world and all the complexity completely, okay? But they can be closer than they are today. Today, we are shifting AD to the left, showing the price level going down, and that's just not right, and it's not what we should be teaching students. We should be teaching them a little bit more nuance, this concept of restrictive monetary policy, or accommodative during times of recession monetary policy, and I think this could be a better way to do it. Hope it starts a bit of a dialogue out there. Anyhow, hope to see you in the next video.